My name is Carol Jones, and I'm happy to welcome you all to this backed by popular demand panel on higher education. Please turn your audio off, and that will provide the best experience for everyone, unless you are speaking or asking a question at the end. And there will be questions at the end. Set your view to speaker view, which is up in the right-hand corner. You have a choice of gallery or speaker, and speaker is usually the one that will put whoever is speaking first and foremost on the screen. And a recording of the event will be available on our members only section of the website after the event. I'd like to recognize that we live and work on the ancestral lands of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh nations. And with that, I want to introduce Gloria Makarenko, who will introduce our speakers.
Carol, thank you very much. And welcome to this virtual gathering of the International Women's Forum. It really is my pleasure to kind of pick up the discussion where we left off last year about the changing landscape of higher education, about how leaders are navigating those changes. So I am so pleased to welcome back our panelists, and we know that there are many, many demands on your time. So we just want to underscore just how much we appreciate your making time for the IWF today. Now, both of our guests have long and impressive biographies, but in the name of efficiency and for today's discussion, I'm going to keep the introductions very, very brief. Welcome back to Joy Johnson, President and Vice Chancellor of Simon Fraser University since 2020. And I was pleased that Joy was a guest on my radio show on the Coast earlier this week. We were speaking about Simon Fraser University moving towards becoming a living wage employer. So Joy, thank you very much again for making yourself available for that. And we are also very pleased to welcome back Santa Ono, President and Vice Chancellor of the University of British Columbia since 2016. And by now, you have surely heard the news that Santa is the president-elect and will be the 15th president of the University of Michigan in October. So we certainly congratulate you, Santa, but boy, we're going to be so sorry to see you go. So I have got questions for you both. And for the final 15 minutes or so, what we'd like to do is open it up to questions from our members. So let's jump in here.
Just before we jump in, Gloria, I was remiss in not properly introducing you. I just assume everybody knows who you are. But Gloria is an IWF member and a longtime CBC host and journalist. She currently hosts the daily current affairs program On the Coast on CBC Radio and also hosts Our Vancouver on CBC television.
You see, I just probably jumped right in there on top of you. It's all about moving forward. So thank you very much for adding that for sure. Yeah, I'm just in one of our little side rooms here. The newsroom is just down the hall here. So getting ready for our show this afternoon already. Let's start with you, Santa Ono. Personal experience with leading through COVID. And I guess more importantly, what has changed in terms of your attitudes, perspectives in the past year, especially?
Well, thank you so much. I think I speak for any university president in saying that from the perspective of faculty, staff, and students, this 2.5, almost 3 years has been a very challenging period, just as it is for all of society, but especially for institutions of higher learning. It's very difficult because you have lots of youngsters who are 17 or 18, even younger in age. And it's a time where they're used to having a celebration about their graduation from secondary school and the excitement of coming to a university. And all of those celebrations, milestones were disrupted during this period of time. And so I'll tell you that leading an institution, my focus has really been on the well-being of the most vulnerable, the youngest individuals who are joining the academy. Of course, it's also affected faculty and staff at the institution as well. So in terms of your question about how we go about trying to lead an institution during these unprecedented times. What we try to do is to adopt a commitment to act with care and compassion as we navigate the challenges brought about by COVID-19, thinking about our systems, our offerings, and our supports, financial and otherwise. There was no playbook to go by, as I said in the last conversation. So it's really pushed the leadership of the institution to meet regularly, to think about how to navigate the ever-changing environment and the multiple waves that we have had to deal with, not knowing how the variants would behave in terms of their responsiveness to vaccines and how pathogenic they might be. And so we still have that question mark as we approach the beginning of this upcoming academic year. And I'm sure that Joy, like as is the case at UBC, we have contingency plans. We have different approaches that we might adopt, taking in all the information that we have from BC CDC, from the PHO, and from experts at UBC as well. So we really don't know what's going to happen even in August of this year. And we have duplicate plans, one where we'll be face-to-face, fully face-to-face, and different layers of protection depending upon what the public health information provides to us.
We've all become experts at adaptability, haven't we? I mean, I know there's no other choice, but it must be interesting as leaders to see issues like care and compassion that you point out there kind of rise to the top of the heap. I'm sure they've always been there as you lead, but you may have other priorities. But when you see that, no, if we don't have the care and compassion, then nothing else happens. Joy, I'd like to hear from your perspective. What have you seen?
Yeah, thanks, Gloria. And it's just great to be back with the forum and see so many great colleagues and friends around the Zoom room today. I would say similar to Santa, obviously there was no playbook. And, it really created a lot of stress and anxiety. And I know this is true across all sectors. But when you're trying to lead an organization, with 35,000 students and thousands of faculty and staff, it's really hard to kind of keep things together. And one thing I've really learned is you can't over communicate. It's really important to help people understand the decisions you're making, why you're making them, et cetera. I think one thing that certainly has changed is that we will need to be a hybrid workplace from now on. And I think we're all experiencing that. And it's challenging. And it's something I'm really paying a lot of attention to. Santa mentioned the importance of paying attention and thinking about the needs of our students. And we are, as I said to you this week, Gloria, bricks and mortars campus, and want to provide a vibrant campus experience for our students. And that means having staff and faculty come to campus and be part of the community. And we've got a number of faculty and staff in particular who feel very comfortable at home and are reluctant to, pay the parking and the money for gas and to come back to campus. And so we're rolling out a hybrid work plan. And it's not without road bumps for sure. But it's so interesting is, talking to leaders across different sectors, this is such a common theme about how we're going to be thinking about the new workplace. And certainly I know that's true for a number of post-secondary institutions as well as we think about this. And we've had a lot of discussions as well about hybrid learning and really what's best pedagogically for our students. And it's just not going to be feasible to offer everything online and on campus. Doesn't make sense pedagogically. So we're doing a lot of thinking about that as well. And then finally, I will say, people are tired. And I think that's trying to lead an organization where people are fatigued is another thing I've been thinking a lot about. And that care and compassion that Santa mentioned is so important. But I've realized, and I've actually been told, you've got to say thank you a lot right now to people and recognize the work they've done, but also just create a bit more space for people as we try to ramp up and think about what's going to be happening this fall. So yeah, it's such an interesting time and so many lessons, but I'll leave it there for now.
Yeah, lessons learned. But I also want to touch on just the personal. And Santa, I mean, obviously you've also been weighing decisions over leaving Vancouver, moving closer to family, all that kind of thing. When that all converges, how has this affected you on a personal level?
Well, I would say that in my case, COVID and the pandemic didn't really have a bearing on that decision. That decision was very difficult. For those of you who know my story, I was born in Vancouver. I learned to ride my bike on Main Mall when there were still cars on Main Mall, and so really the sidewalks of it. And my home, where I was a toddler, is still here. And so, as you've heard me say, this is really a dream job and a dream situation for me. It wasn't so much for me the pandemic or COVID, it was really the distance. My father's going to be 95, and he and my mother live alone. They live in a senior living community, but it's not assisted living. And they had a number of accidents during the year. They broke bones, and anybody who has elderly parents knows how scary that is. And it's simply not possible for me to jump on a plane and be there as quickly as needed when they injure themselves. And so getting closer, just an hour and a half away by plane, makes all the difference in the world. And my parents were there for me for 6 decades of my life. It's time for me to be there for them. You know, my love of UBC in Vancouver will always be there, but my first priority has to be family and taking care of my parents. So it really wasn't the pandemic. In some cases, my colleague in Cambridge, Stephen Toop, who was also president of UBC, many of you know him. As you know, he made a decision to finish his term at Cambridge after only 5 years. In that case, the pandemic was a factor, as he said publicly, and it's in the media, because it just wasn't possible because of travel restrictions for him to get home and see his family and his grandkids in Toronto. Certainly that wasn't the case for me. You can still travel in North America, but the distance makes it really hard for me to be a responsible child in taking care of my parents. I will say, just generally to answer your question though, it has been, I think, a factor in many leaders' lives. You're seeing there was some concern about a great resignation. In my case, this is not a resignation. I'm still going to be a university president. But in some cases, if you look across Canada, what may not be apparent to many individuals is that, and Joy knows this because we're both serving on the board of Universities Canada. A shocking thing is we went to the retreat for that organization recently and learned that about 1/3 of all university presidents across Canada have stepped down during the pandemic. It's a staggering resignation. There are resignations occurring in many sectors, but whether you look across Canada or south of the border in the US, the same thing's happening. There are about 25 major university presidencies that are open right now. I do know from talking to some of them, because they're my friends, that the tremendous stress of managing essentially a large town or a small city during this has really gotten to a number of leaders. So hopefully that answers your question. In my case, it wasn't the situation. I'm a pretty resilient person, but for me, it was really much more personal about being there for my parents.
No, it's understandable. I think there are a lot of people in your situation, that sandwich generation as well, and people are living so much longer. They're finding, you know, again, parents into their 90s is becoming more the norm. So yeah, no, you got at a lot of really interesting points there. And Joy, maybe you can pick up on that, you know, personal experience and what Santa touches on in terms of navigating as a leader and lessons you learn through that.
Yeah, and I think I mentioned this last time, Gloria. You know, I started my presidency in September 2020 when the pandemic is just kind of starting to take off, and have been leading through it. So I feel like I didn't, you know, I almost want to redo in a way. You know, it's I've spent a lot of my time and effort focused internally instead of externally, and a lot of the things I was looking forward to was the external work, you know, working with partners, working, you know, with our donors, working with our international community to really lift up SFU. And that fun work, you know, wasn't available. Partly because I really had to focus on keeping the organization moving forward. And so it was a different job than I initially thought it was going to be. And I get a lot of, I'm an extrovert, I'll admit it. And I get a lot of my energy from being with people and spending time with people. I just enjoy those occasions. And I found it hard to not have those opportunities. I mean, this is good today. I get to see people. There's Julia Kim. Good, so good to see Julia and I see others. It's so nice, but it's not the same, right? It's not the same as being in person with people. And so personally, I have found that very difficult. And I guess the other thing too, and this is getting back to people being tired, and I've learned this, and I've learned this from great leaders like Martha Piper and Indira Samarasekera, that you have to, when you're a leader, also be very prepared to take a lot of criticism. And I'll say during the pandemic, there's been a fair share of criticism going around in terms of leadership, because a lot of people just weren't happy. No matter what decision you were making, there was always going to be constituencies who were unhappy. And I actually found, Indira and Martha's book so timely. I love the title of that book, Nerve, because they reminded me, and we talked about this, that, as a leader, you really want to be liked, right? But when you need to be liked, that's when you're in trouble. And so it's really been important for me, and I've thought about this a lot, to kind of just keep that North Star about where you want to go as an institution, what your values are, where you're headed. And that's been just such an important learning to be thinking about as we, try to keep things together during these really challenging times.
Wow, thank you. That was personal and revealing. I appreciate you sharing that with us today. So, Santa, you talked about duplicate plans, contingency plans. Joy, you underscored the need for communication when you're communicating those plans, so everyone's on the same page. But Santa, what did you find in terms of, I want to get at sort of disgruntled professors or instructors saying, okay, now you want me to go online, now you want me to go in class, now you want me to do half and half of both? I mean, in what ways did you offer them supports?
Well, I would say that there was a little bit of that. In retrospect, thinking about, I've been a president for 11 years at two different institutions. And so I have a lot of data points on a level of disgruntledness, if that is a word. It really actually was not that significant. And I have a pretty good pulse because, as you know, I'm on social media. So if people are disgruntled, you find out immediately on social media. I would say it's pretty modest. And, after the announcement that I'd be stepping down in October, that's a pretty good litmus test of people's feelings, because there were 550 articles written about the announcement, and every one of them has a comments section, right? So Gloria, that you can get a pretty good idea how people are feeling from what people are saying in response to those articles. I would say the UBC community, and I will forever be grateful for this, the sense I've gotten is that certainly they were disgruntled here and there, but I've really valued and appreciate the support that I've received from the professors at UBC. They've been very direct with me when they feel that we should go in a certain direction. But I've really listened to them, and decisions that we've made have not been the same as all other institutions. And I've gotten considerable amount of support, either directly during those decisions or in the commentary in those articles. And so I'd focus on the positive, the fact that the vast majority of the community understands that this has been a challenging time. And I feel very blessed to have had significant support from the vast majority of people on campus.
Okay, in what ways did you go in a different direction?
Well, as you know, we were late in starting. Later in starting than other institutions, we put a considerable amount of resource and effort into standing up validation of vaccine records and testing on a regular basis. This is not something that was uniformly the case across all the institutions for a variety of reasons. We were also the last to relax the mandatory mask mandate. And this was because we were certainly listening to the advice that we're receiving from the sector table and from the PHO. Many of these people are our faculty, but we were also listening to our community as well. So there hasn't been absolute uniformity in what everyone does. We respect the diversity of opinions on the approaches, but we really felt that we had to be responsive to our own academic community. If you talk to presidents across the province, they'll tell you that the microenvironments and public health situations in different places, even between the Point Grey campus and the Okanagan campus, are quite different. And so I think it's incumbent upon the leader to integrate all that into the decisions that you make. And that's what we did.
Okay, Joy Johnson, what about for you? I guess particularly in terms of supports for professors and instructors that maybe came about because of COVID or through this process?
Yeah, I think it was really important to be thinking about the supports that particularly our professoriate needed. And, you know, Gloria, one thing, and we saw this very early on around the differential effects of the pandemic on women in particular. You know, that, you know, as work was being pushed home and children were not in school, there were differential effects on our female faculty and instructors, and we had to think very, very carefully about how to support them. And part of that was just signaling that we recognized that work was going to have to be done differently, and recognizing that we needed to kind of change some of or be cognizant at least of some of the dynamics around their consideration for things like promotion and tenure, and to just drop the pressure a little bit. But that, I think, was really important. The other thing is, you know, I mean, I just looked at the issues that we had on getting on Zoom today, and, you know, just think about instructors who'd never taught on Zoom before, who'd never been involved in this kind of technology for instruction. And it was difficult, and it took a lot. Our Center for Educational Excellence worked really hard to equip our instructors, our faculty, with the tools that they need. And some people thrived and did a fantastic job, and others really struggled. I would say, I think there's now evidence coming out, to be frank, that the quality of instruction during the pandemic has not been as good quality in terms of learning outcomes for students. And I think we do need to bear that in mind as we go forward and think about the future. You know, just moving a course online does not necessarily mean that it's going to be a quality educational experience. So these are things we have to think deeply about. The other thing at SFU is that we realize we just don't have the technology in place to deliver the way we'd like to in all courses. And so, you know, something I'm talking to the Ministry of Advanced Education Skills Training about on a regular basis as well, is what we require as a university, public university, to really think about different forms of delivery as well. So yeah, lots to think about.
That's a really interesting point. Santa Ono, I'd really like to hear your thoughts on that comment about overall experience. And yes, there are some people that thrive in that element. They're comfortable with the technology. They don't need the social aspect. They don't need the campus. But what would be your comment on sort of the overall quality of education in the past few years?
Well, I'll talk first about the quality of education because that's your question, but I think it's important for me to also talk about the work experience for faculty and students as well, because they're all members of the university community. I agree with Joy that our information, our data, our surveys indicate that the quality of the education isn't the same as face-to-face instruction. And we know directly from our students that even though it was convenient for them to wake up at 7:59 a.m. for an 8 a.m. class and not have to change or to walk across campus, that they miss that face-to-face instruction, that those organic encounters with professors on the main mall or with students where a lot of learning actually takes place, also within the halls of residence. So absolutely, that's what we see as well, Joy. I would say that there are students who would like to still have both the hybrid format. There are some times where they would like to be able to access a lecture capture video, and it's very convenient, and we'll do our very, very best to do so, keeping in mind any impact on the workload of faculty members at the institution. So there is some of that kind of sentiment from students. And so I think that how we deliver instruction from the students' point of view will change moving forward, because they do see some of the advantages of being able to deliver things by streaming video or by lecture capture. So there'll be some of that. It's been quite expensive. You know, it's been about $20 million for us in terms of investments in facilitating that kind of support in terms of technology, also in terms of learn students that provide support for faculty members who are not digital natives. And so those costs will continue in this upcoming year. So those are the sorts of things that we're mindful of in thinking about the quality of the educational experience. But I think it's important for me to also say, as some of you may know, that we have just announced a remote work policy for the university. And we're one of the first major research universities to release that policy. You know, that actual remote work policy devolves the responsibility from the center of the organization to the units, to the faculties and the departments. And that's recognizing that in some cases, face-to-face either service or instruction is an absolute necessity. In certain kinds of pedagogy, that's critically important. In others, we feel that for the well-being of faculty and staff, as we still navigate the remainder of this pandemic, we have heard loud and clear from faculty and staff that some of those individuals want to have that option at least part of the time, not 100% of the time, but perhaps a couple of days or 3 days a week to have the option to work from home. That has had a positive impact on their quality of life. So it's not a simple equation. Then what might benefit the student might also cause stress on faculty and staff, and we have to integrate all that into our policies.
Yeah, and again, depending on the student and depending on the staff member, it's very interesting because all these cases are individual. You know, it's curious. You're leading through change. You're coping through crisis right now. You're also in a situation where you have to plan ahead, and that's got to be really difficult, especially when you're planning campus priorities, you know, expanding certain faculties, and I'm talking even physical planning. So Joy, I know you've got the university that's sort of separate from SFU, but that whole Burnaby Mountain community is growing so much. So when we're talking about student accommodation, new lecture halls, expansion, where are you at? What's the mindset right now on that kind of planning?
Yeah, thanks. You know, it's interesting. I think now more than ever, it's important to plan and to be thinking about what's next. And we've embarked on a strategic planning process called What's Next SFU. And part of that is to think about priorities for the university, but it's all that can guide some of this decision making. I think now, and Santa alluded to this, you know, budgets are a lot more tight right now because of the pandemic. We've seen some softening of enrollment over the summer, in particular, students taking less of a course load. But we're also seeing some other dynamics in terms of, as we mentioned, in terms of thinking about how we, you know, around people, you know, and their office space needs. And all of that needs to be taken into account as we plan. You know, I often, with forgiveness for the faculty on the Zoom today, you know, often faculty offices are book storage areas. You know, our faculty are out and about in the world doing fantastic things. And, you know, I think we're rethinking, you know, what kind of space do we need to provide? What kind of offices, you know, what kind of spaces do we need for our students? One thing that we learned during the pandemic is that a lot of our students actually were coming to campus with their computers to actually do their courses online on campus. And we learned that we just didn't have enough space for them to do that, a quiet space to study remotely. And they needed to do that because they couldn't do it at home because their parents were, you know, using the office and the kitchen table, and they had no place to go. So I think we're thinking a little bit differently, again, about our spaces. But we're also thinking about our priorities and how we can kind of double down and think about, as a university, you know, what are the values that are going to drive our decision making? What are the areas that we really want to lean into? What do we want to be known for? What are some of the, what are some of the transformational changes at this moment that we need to be making?
Okay, now you bring up something very interesting I'd like to follow up on, which is that the softening enrollment and the lighter course load and how that affects the bottom line ultimately. But Santa Ono, what about the expansions on UBC campus and the approach now?
Well, those of you who are at UBC will know that the abbreviation UBC, under building construction, still holds true. There has never been a time where we have been building as much. And the great news is that the investments are towards academic and research buildings. We have, if you walk through campus, a significant progress in our new School of Biomedical Engineering. That is on schedule. And a very, very large building, probably the largest academic building that has ever been built on our campus is underway right now, which is called the Gateway Building, which will be a new home to our schools of nursing and kinesiology. We want to support those schools, and kinesiology is the top ranked program in North America and one of the top 3 or 4 in the world. And they're constrained and they're distributed across campus. So they deserve that, so that we can support the research and the faculty and students of that school. There are 2 cranes that are currently, we're erecting 2 towers for the Faculty of Arts and also for services for students. So that's what's happening on the Point Grey campus. As you know, we have started to expand in Surrey as well as in the Okanagan, in Kelowna. If you've been following the news, the size of those developments are pretty significant. That will allow the Okanagan campus to grow quite, to respond to the needs of that region. We're fortunate that our enrollment is quite strong. And some of these are targeted investments based upon provincial needs. As you know, a lot of the health professions are under-resourced in terms of human capital, and some of the new seats that we have been given for technology seats and also for the health professions are direct new investments for from the province into the institution. So it's quite a bit, and none of that's going to slow down. It's actually accelerating, I would say. But to answer your question about the impact of the pandemic, we are assessing some of the other future buildings, and we are going to certainly look at efficiencies that might be realized by a shared desk kind of a pilot. There's some of those pilots that are already underway at the institution, which might actually slow down some of the future developments. And we're integrating this into a pretty comprehensive process that you might have heard of called Campus 2050, where we're looking at the entire 2,000 acres of land on the 2 campuses to assess what is needed and the pace at which we will grow. So hopefully that answers your question, Gloria.
Yeah, it does. I'm hearing if we build it, they will come. That's the underlying message. Or if not, they'll tune in by Zoom or Google Meet or whatever. No, I understand, but it is encouraging to know that there is still growth, physical growth on your campuses as well. So before I turn things over to the members for some of their questions, I guess I'd just like to hear, I mean, here at CBC, we're navigating those same issues. Most of my team is still working from home. I miss the face-to-face meetings, the, pre-interview chats and preps and all that, fun kind of social aspect that goes along with it. It gets we're in a huge cavernous newsroom that's probably 10% occupied right now, which really changes the dynamic. But you point out that these issues do affect many different sectors. I just like to hear your vision of the new normal. What is the new normal at the university level? Joy?
Yeah, I think the new normal for us is, we will continue to create a vibrant campus life for our students. And that is really important to us. And we've thinking a lot about that. It's interesting, Gloria, we're building a lot of residence and housing on our campus right now on Burnaby Mountain. But one thing, 80% of our students live at home. But we have over 1,000 students on a waiting list to get into residence and housing. Because even if they live, let's say, in Abbotsford, they still want to live on campus. And so particularly for our local students, we want to make sure that we can provide them with a vibrant campus experience. But the new normal, I think, is to be creative and to pivot and to look and to take some risks and to look at what those opportunities are. I think the new normal too, and this is part of what I've been talking a lot about recently, is to pay attention also to the post-secondary sector and the way that we have an important role to play in the BC economy, in growing opportunities in British Columbia through providing the skills that are required in terms of the ambitions of government and contributing to making sure that the talent is there, the research and development is there, et cetera. And so these are, areas that, universities lean into hard and are priorities of government right now. Clean tech, for example. We all recognize that we all need to be working on this. And so it's an area of incredible importance. And we see, I know UBC is doing this as well. We see a number of universities stepping up. And I think this is part of, again, the new normal, is that universities need to be involved not only in economic recovery, but in the pressing issues of our time, in the pressing issues. And those include, as we know, the housing crisis, the opioid crisis, climate change, and also helping to develop a thriving new economy here in British Columbia. So I think that alignment is probably more important than ever.
Okay, thank you very much, Santa Ono. And this must be such a strange time for you as you're sort of counting months now. If you're going to be the head of the University of Michigan in October, you're kind of countdown time, sewing up some projects, I'm sure. But I would like to hear your perspective on the new normal, not just at UBC, but right across post-secondary education.
Well, I'm not actually counting down at all. I'm just the pedal to the metal. What I've said to the board chairs, and you can see I've been at work every single day from early till late. So I will be the UBC president until October 13th. So I'm not counting any days, to be frank. But then I'm also being contacted regularly from south of the border from the University of Michigan. It's a gigantic university. I thought UBC was big with the $3 billion budget. They have an 11 billion US budget. So it gives you an idea of how big it is. And so they are certainly contacting me on a regular basis. So in a way, I almost feel like president of two universities. And so I don't know how much sleep I'm going to get between now and then. But in terms of the new normal and what I think is going to happen at UBC and across the sector, you made a comment, Gloria, about build it and they will come. You probably know that we have built 11 residence halls during my time here at UBC. We now have verging on 17,000 students living in those residence halls, not counting those living in basements and homes in Point Grey and elsewhere in Kitts. And so we are already the largest residential campus in North America, bar none. And we will build more. Even with that, we have about a waiting list of about 3,800, even after adding several thousand beds in the past several years in the 11 residence halls. So build it and they will come is true. And it is a reflection of how badly students actually want to be in residence. And I got to tell you that over the years, if you've watched UBC and this campus, it's really enriched the community and the environment. When you have faculty and students living on campus 24/7 as opposed to commuting in and out, it really creates an academic community that's very vibrant and allows that kind of 24/7 interaction that makes universities just such stimulating places to study and to work and to play. And so that I think is going to continue. I see no downturn in the interest in faculty and students living on this campus. So I think that there'll be more building for faculty and staff to live on campus. It's going to be necessary in terms of affordability for young faculty to be able to live and work at UBC. And so there'll be more faculty and staff living on campus. There'll be more students living on campus. And I think that's all good. In terms of what I think the new normal will look like in terms of what happens in the institution, we've already started to pivot towards that. I'm really more focused on not so much the bricks and mortar, even though that's going to grow, but really positioning the institution to be impactful in having an impact on social good, broadly defined. And I'm not talking just about public health issues such as an opioid crisis and climate change, but I'm also talking about how to instill it in our students and our faculty and staff values that will, I think, position them to maximize their potential and to use those skills and talents to address those issues that are really threatening civilization as we speak. The divisiveness, the geopolitical tensions. I think that universities are critical places for the kinds of conversations that need to take place to address these threats to our very civilization. So we've tried to, the last thing I'll say, we've tried to, in the new normal, pivot to institution to support those kinds of interdisciplinary activities so that we can have a positive impact on those issues that threaten us.
Yeah, well said. And it's interesting that you both touch on those. This is not just about what happens on the campus. This is about the campus reflecting what's happening in the world all around us. And Joy Johnson also touched on those points. So that is encouraging to hear for sure. I would like to open up the floor now to our members if they have questions for you. Carol, I'm not getting the regular screen. I'm not even seeing the chat. The chat icon here on the screen I've got right now. So rather than me fiddling around with it, perhaps I can turn things over to you to navigate the questions from our members.
Sure. There are no questions so far, but I've just sent a message to everyone saying, please type your questions in the chat box.
Jill,
Jill has her hand up.
Yeah.
Okay, well, that is ideal as well. Anyway, okay, well, we can just keep chatting about summertime. I mean,
do you want me to jump in?
Sure, please do.
Thanks, Joy. Thanks, Santa. So that was amazing. So inspiring and so incredibly relevant. Particularly to me, I was just laughing because my eldest daughter selected her residence this morning for an out of school a university. But all of what you said is so amazing. But the question I had is just based on all that you've described and the I'm just curious from a student perspective, what impacts and outcomes are you seeing as students transition? Over the last few years, it's been so tremendous and we've seen all that resilience. But as they start to enter the workforce, and as we look around this table, and many of us are business leaders or community leaders and employers, what are some of the things that we should be thinking about as we're creating work environments and roles, and how can we best support these students that are entering the work world from post-secondary in this crazy time?
Want to go ahead, Joy? Go ahead.
Sure, I'll start. Jill, it's so interesting to think about because I think about the last, 2.5 years, our graduates are leaving university without some of the key social dynamics that we would have perhaps wanted them to have. Some of the work integrated learning and co-op opportunities were not as available for them. And so while I've been really proud of the fact that, our students are grabbed up quickly and end up in positions that they feel very satisfied with very quickly after graduation, I think we just need to be mindful of the fact that they might not have some of the kind of finishing that we might want them to have, and just to be thinking about that. The interactions, and it's often in those upper level courses in particular at the university where you do small group work, you do some of the more problem solving activities that involve, and we tried to do some of that online, but it's very difficult, I think, to really fully, I think, have that type of experience. And the other thing I'll say is that, and I've noticed this with young people themselves, is that there's a social awkwardness, and I think we're all experiencing it. And this is, do you shake hands? Like how do you physically be in the world? And I think we're all taking cues from one another. But I would say it's really interesting to me. I think that there is a particular awkwardness that I'm experiencing with our new grads as they go out to try and navigate, how to be, because they're maybe a little less confident.
Yeah.
So yeah, so those would just be a few things I'd think about.
Yeah, really helpful.
Jill, Jill, let me answer that question. I have my daughter just graduated from university, and I have a nephew that's in the working world. He worked with PayPal after graduating from Emory University. He was a nationally competitive swimmer, elite swimmer there, and he's a very strong young man. But to give you an idea, he was the captain of the team, and they're perennially national champion competitive at the Division III level.
Amazing.
And that's a big part of their life there. He was reduced to tears when the championship was canceled because of COVID. And so I bring that up because this is something that's commonplace. All of our kids and our nieces and nephews are experiencing that kind of disappointment. Perhaps not being able to have a graduation at the Chan Center if they're graduating from UBC. And I can tell you that we know with the reaction response for those really saying we really want to have a makeup, how important those milestones are to a feeling of validation of what they've earned in terms of completion of their degree. And so what we have to be mindful of for our children, your child and mine, is what they've actually missed out on and how that's impacted on them. Even if it's not clearly visible, inside they have been hurt by what the pandemic has presented to them in many different ways. I can tell you that the University of Michigan is part of something called the AAU, which is a group of about 64 universities, 2 in Canada, McGill in Toronto, and others in the US. And I already know what the agenda is going to be in October, and the number one agenda item is going to be mental health wellness of students and graduates. So if you look at the data of the number of visits and counselor requests that we're receiving per capita across the board, both north and south of the border, is through the roof. And so we're expecting a tsunami of mental health challenges for incoming students. But we also are mindful that the young alumni, the recent graduates, are going into the working world, often in a remote situation, in a strange city, without being surrounded by a couple of thousand other youngsters their age, which is in and of itself a support system. So, Jill, I would say that all of us who are parents should be mindful of and check in on our kids, especially if they've graduated and they're living alone in an apartment in a strange city working remotely. That's very, very lonely. And it's on the foundation of a couple of years of not having normal social interactions.
Absolutely. I appreciate your comments. And I see us all having that role, right, as parents and as business leaders and community leaders and employers. And this is going to be ongoing. So thank you both for your leadership and your thoughtful comments.
Okay, we have some more questions. Coralie, did you have a question?
I did. Thank you very much, Carol. Joy and Santa, thank you very much for your leadership during some very challenging times. I should say I'm an MLA, so I'm coming from, my comments as a government perspective on how there is, I believe, and Joy, you touched upon it, with 1 million job openings coming. We're seeing, a crumbling healthcare situation right now. We desperately need professionals. We desperately need, all of the amazing people that our universities are producing. I think there's 2 challenges that I see right now. A, how can every one of us on this call be supporting higher education? Because I think it's critically important. The second, I know that there's a funding review that is happening, and I think it's critically important that we get that right, because if we don't, we are going to see the challenges just become more challenging. And then I guess the third thing, and I guess it comes back to all of these, governments can invest in these seats, so we can invest in all these pieces, but if we don't have the students wanting to take the training, how do we resolve some of the challenges challenges that we're currently seeing. And I know that's a lot of questions, and I just want to say I'm open to having further conversations in the future on how we can help navigate with government on some of these things.
Do you mind if I start with this one, Joy?
Yeah, go ahead.
I'll say that it's pretty safe for me to be very candid because I'm transitioning, and so I'm going to be very frank that all levels of government, I believe, need to step up, and part of it is resource. And I'll tell you, I'm pretty familiar with what's happening in different jurisdictions, obviously in Michigan, but also Pennsylvania. In the US, and they're asking exactly the same questions that you have just asked, which are the right questions. How do we as a society position ourselves for a post-pandemic recovery? The British Columbia, the government are asking the right questions, and the funding review is going to be critical. But I'll be very frank, if you've been following what's happening in those other jurisdictions where support of the institutions was either plateauing or decreasing in terms of the true cost of providing education, those jurisdictions have significantly increased investment in post-secondary. And so since I'm leaving, I can say there's no self-interest here. This is really for the good of the system and for the next generation. I think it's imperative that British Columbia do that as well. I can first say that British Columbia has supported post-secondary in a very strong way. If you look proportionally at the amount of the operating budget, the block grant that supports our institutions, it is much more generous than south of the border. But in this new reality, to meet the challenges that you've articulated, to be able to deliver as an institution, SFU, UBC, the entire sector, which is very diversified, needs to have at least a little bit of an uplift. Otherwise, it's going to be a tremendous challenge. So I'm just being very honest with you about that. And I'm confident, I just heard from Don Wright just this morning, and it's clear from his message to me that he understands the importance of post-secondary in the economic recovery and in ensuring that British Columbia continues to thrive well into the future. So that's what I would say. Whatever you can do to be supportive of that during this critical window of time, I think it's really important for all of us.
Yeah, Corley, thanks for that question as well. And for those of you on the Zoom, the Ministry of Advanced Education and Skills Training is undertaking a funding formula review. This is to look at how our entire post-secondary sector is funded. And Don Wright is leading the first phase of that. It's a fact-finding mission. He's had interviews, conversations across the sector. And I think to your point, Corley, I think he really is gaining a sense of strengths and opportunities. We are very lucky in British Columbia. We have a wonderful post-secondary system, and it actually works as a system. And I think one of the questions is how to strengthen it as a system. And that's an example of the system is an amazing college transfer program where credits at a college are recognized by universities. Believe it or not, other provinces don't have that. And we're lucky that we have it. But to your point as well, in terms of allocation of seats and where seats go, I think we all have to do really understand where jobs are going. And actually, the best market signal is our students. I would say they know where the jobs are going. They know what kind of programs they want to sign up for. And so if I look at Simon Fraser University, they're beating down the doors to study computing science, anything to do with computational sciences. They're beating down the doors, particularly in the health sciences. So we have very robust enrollments there. And I think part of what we need to do is think about what the demands of tomorrow are going to be, but also listen to our students in terms of where they see the opportunities going. And I really love that notion of students as an early market signal, because all of us actually can't predict the future. We can't actually predict where the jobs are all going to be. And we need to be able to pivot pretty quickly. And one of the best ways to adapt is to have a great university education. right? To actually know how to problem solve, to do the critical thinking that you need to do, because the skills in the market will change. But some basics, I think, are going to be required by all of our students. So I do think a lot of opportunity for expansion. There are a number of students wanting to come to university who can't come. When I talk about softening of numbers at SFU, it's primarily our international students softening because they can't get visas to come. That right now, they're not able to show up in Canada, and that's and to the point, to be very clear, the funding formula funds us for domestic students, and what we have to do and what we want to do is have international students come to our university, and partly, to be frank, they're a revenue stream for the university, but they offer so much to the university as well in terms of their ideas, global perspectives, etc. So, there's a lot to think about here in terms of thinking about the responsiveness and those the million jobs that we're going to be seeing over the next 10 years, most of which will require university education.
Well, you have both given us plenty to think about, and it has been such an enlightening conversation. And I think quite a bit different from the conversation that we had last year. We picked up on some themes, but you took it somewhere else. So I really appreciate that. And I know there are still a few questions there, but I'm very cognizant of your schedules and your timing. Thank you both very, very much for taking this hour with us. Joy Johnson, President and Vice Chancellor of Simon Fraser University, Santa Ono, President and Vice Chancellor of UBC, and as of October, President of the University of Michigan. Santa, you're going to miss that view that we see behind you on that screen.
Absolutely, that's true.
Of the UBC campus. Thank you both so much. It's really, really been interesting. And Carol, I don't know if you have a final word.
I just want to thank all of our attendees on behalf of IWF BC Forum. And you, Gloria, for excellent moderation. This has been terrific.
My pleasure.
Same time next year?
Yeah, well, we can reach Santa in Michigan, I'm sure. It's just a click away now.
Oh, you can all come to Michigan for a football game.
All the best to you, and have a great
Thank
summer,
you.
everyone.
Thank you
Bye,
all.
everybody.